And of course, one of the wars plaguing really the world for the last few years is Ukraine. And one issue plaguing Ukraine is the hit to its power network, as we have seen. However, the country of Lithuania is stepping in to help to fix that problem. Joining us now to explain is the Lithuanian Foreign Minister, Gabrielius Landsbergis, a well-known face on the show. Foreign Minister, welcome back to the show. Let me pick up, and I'll get to Ukraine in just a moment. Let me just pick up where our correspondent Alex Marquardt has just left off, and that is there's numerous challenges and the crises facing world leaders right now. One of those, of course, is the escalating conflict in the Middle East and the war in Gaza. Can I first get your reaction to what we are seeing in Lebanon? More than 500 people killed, mass exodus of civilians from southern Lebanon, while Hezbollah fires back on Israel. Your thoughts?
Well, we're definitely living in what is called a post-crisis moment of our history. Where each and every new crisis has a potential to brew a new one. What is needed is leadership. And only leadership and stepping up can stop the spiral of crises from getting out of control. We need leadership in Ukraine. We need leadership in Middle East so that it doesn't become a crisis of Indo-Pacific or elsewhere. Because the authoritarians of the world who want to unravel the fabric of how we live and each and every day, they are looking at this and they're calculating how these things are happening. So to sum it up, I'm really worried, as probably most of the people gathered here in New York these days.
I wondered then how we can go about as world leaders, as you're all meeting New York, Mr. Landsbergis, how we can go about de-escalating. An Israeli official just told CNN that the Israeli military has not ruled out the possibility of a ground invasion into Lebanon. Is this the best strategy, you think, to get the 60,000 Israelis back home? And what concerns, if any, do you have, of course, of broadening this war further in the region?
Well, first of all, there is a high chance of escalation. That is clear, and that is confirmed.
Well, we already have escalation.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not. It could be very well not the end. That's a problem. We're seeing a scale going up, and we don't know where it stops. Either we are, at the plateau stage, or it could be just the beginning. My point is that there are ways, and the colleague that just spoke before me, he very clearly laid out the instruments that are there. Take international rules and regulations that have to be upheld. There are instruments that countries like United States and others can use in order to put pressure on on countries so that they would behave towards the line that U.S. and other allies would wish them to. So there are ways, definitely, and they have been used in the past.
Yeah. Just those levers haven't been employed, as our Alex Marquardt was just saying in New York. Let's turn, Foreign Minister, to the war in Ukraine. In less than 24 hours or so, we are expecting to hear from President Zelensky as he outlines. We don't have the details of this, so he outlines his victory plan. Just explain to us what this victory plan can achieve, where other victory plans have failed in the past.
Well, there's, first of all, there's the difference. This is the first victory plan. We have seen peace plans. We have seen peace plan by President Zelensky, basically upholding the principles how to make Ukraine safe, secure, and the order in European continent being restored. So that was presented in the past. For the first time, we're talking about how to win a conflict, how to win a war. Certain details have already emerged, and I think that one of them is particularly important. This is when President Zelensky and representatives from Ukrainian administration are talking about the security guarantees. And I think that this has not been stressed enough of how important it is. One can expect a number of ways how the conflict might end, with Ukraine being able to regain the land currently now, or having to the conflict would drag on. But the question is, how do you prevent Russians from continuing their aggression or attacking again? And in order to stop this, the only way to do this is security guarantees. And the only security guarantee that actually works in Europe currently is Article 5 of Washington Treaty. Well, NATO treaty.
NATO treaty, of course. And that's not the only thing that many are hoping will be part of this victory plan, Foreign Minister. The other thing, and we've heard on numerous occasions, you and I have spoken about this before here on the show, is this plea by President Zelensky to use long-range Western-supplied missiles like the ATACMS into Russian territory. I know Lithuania's position. I follow you on X, as you know. Your position is very clear. Whatever victory takes is what your position is, Lithuania's position is. Are you hopeful that the US will sign off on this? And why do you think the US has been so reticent to allow their weapons to be used inside Russia?
Look, it's very difficult to have a very clear explanation. On one hand, we understand that there are those who worry about the possibility of Russia escalating, right? If certain steps would be taken by the Western allies, by US. But we've already been there. This record has already been played, and nothing has happened. Russians threatened with escalation when they saw that there's a chance of HIMARS being deployed in Ukraine, when the tanks would be deployed, when F-16s would be deployed, when ATACMS would be given to Ukraine. So many times Putin has said that he will do something about it. He has not done something about it. So it's rather unclear as to what is the expectation of the whole conflict. What do we expect to happen? In Lithuania, it is very clear. We expect Ukraine to win. That is the only way that we believe is to stop Putin and to stop future aggressions.
And we know the timing it's critical here, as it has always been. And we know President Zelensky has said that this fall will determine the future of this war. He said before he left to the UN. This fall, Foreign Minister, we're all going to see also US elections. And as you well know, former President Donald Trump has wavered, you and I have discussed this, on his support for Ukraine. This is what he said last night, Foreign Minister. Have a listen to this.
Ukraine now, I see Zelensky is here. I think Zelensky is the greatest salesman in history. Every time he comes into the country, he walks away with $60 billion. Billion! Walks in with $60 billion. He wants them to win this election so badly. But I would do differently. I will work out peace as president-elect. If I win this election, the first thing I'm going to do is call up Zelensky and call up President Putin, and I'm going to say, you got to make a deal.
So, Foreign Minister, if he does win in November, what will this mean for Ukraine, for Lithuania, and indeed for Europe?
Well, I think that certain measures that President Zelensky has laid out and is yet to declare publicly in his victory plan would work for either administration, whichever administration is being formed. And I think that if there's a change in administration and if there's a willingness to have a deal or something like that. So first of all, the deal would be reached by putting Ukraine in the strongest of possible situations, because otherwise there will never be a deal. And if you want to have a deal, if you want to have Ukraine in the strongest possible situation, then again, we talk about weapon supplies, we talk about security guarantees, the ones that I've spoken. We talk about the usage of weapons so that Ukraine would be allowed to use weapons freely, and so on and so forth. So I mean, I would interpret this way. If there's something different in mind that Mr. Trump has, well, then it's a big issue for everybody. But I still hope that it's not something different.
Your sigh, the roll of your eyes, say it all. Foreign Minister, always great to see you. Appreciate your time. Thank you.